Alright, so the epoxy is dried. You can see there are some areas where the wood really soaked it in. I failed to mention in the last video that if I was going to stain this on the outside here and just epoxy the inside, I wouldn't have covered this in epoxy because I'd have to sand it all off to get this to accept stain. So keep that in mind. If you want to stain the wood, you want to make sure to protect that so that the wood will have the ability to soak up the stain. But for this, since I'm going to paint it, I wanted to coat it and seal it. I had cleaned off any of the soot and kind of sanded it a little bit before I coated it with the epoxy. And what I wanted to do was just to kind of seal it to help with the paint adhesion, and hoping that that'll help me keep from having to use as much paint as well. You know, if the wood soaked it in, I have to do multiple coats. So I'm hoping to get this painted in just a couple light coats instead of 3 or 4 light coats. But anyway, I've got a 240 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to lightly scuff over this. There's a couple of imperfections, a couple of bumps, and actually I'm surprised it's not a little smoother than it is, but this will take care of it. This stuff sands pretty easy. However, be sure when you are sanding epoxy, especially if you're not going to wet sand, wear a mask. This stuff, like I said, it's not good for you, so definitely wear a mask if you're going to be sanding it, and keep that in mind. I did have a couple of drips on the bottom, and I just used a file on that, and it took less than a minute. It went right, it sanded right down, filed it right down. All right, I think we're good there. I'm going to get a rag and some mineral spirits and wipe this down, and when I come back, we'll give this a couple coats of paint. All right, so I wiped it down with some mineral spirits to get the sanding dust off, and you want to use something like mineral spirits just because you want something that's going to evaporate fairly quickly. You don't want something that's going to, if there's any wood that can soak up any of that and keep it wet when you're going to have to paint it. You don't want any of that moisture to get trapped in there, cause problems. Also, make sure you're wiping it down with a lint-free rag. I made a rookie mistake, and well, I thought the rag was lint-free. I just kind of grabbed one and a couple swipes and then realized it wasn't lint-free. So if you want to avoid picking off a bunch of fibers, then definitely use a lint-free rag. So I've already shaken the can up for the paint. I'm just putting a thumbtack here so I can use that to spin this around as I coat it. I'm going to do some light coating on this. If you're going to be using spray cans and you're going to use textured paints or anything that's fancier than just normal spray paint, give it a little test spray first, especially if you've already used the can once or twice. That way the initial blast clears out anything. You don't get a weird pattern or get any junk you got to pick off on your product. So always do a little test spray first. All right, see, this was not as heavy. Some of these textured ones, sometimes they have a very forceful blast to get the appearance that is desired. So just always do a test spray, and that way you kind of know what you're dealing with before you start blasting your piece. Also, remember, ventilation, ventilation, ventilation. Cover up anything in the room that you don't want to have any overspray land on, and always plan on it being a bigger spray and more overspray than you expect. I don't know how many rental properties I've gone to do work and see a nice square in the driveway where somebody put down a piece of cardboard thinking they had, plenty down, and then they pick it up and they've left a nice shadow around the cardboard. But anyway, we're going to give this a few sprays, and we'll see how this goes. Again, this is a bronze color matte hammered finish. I've got a bottle cap taped to the table so that I can elevate it and not have it stick on the edges to the plastic. You'll want to wear a mask and again have ventilation. All right, so that's going to be our first coat. We'll let this dry a little bit. This is just to give you an idea. This is just first coat. So I realized that it was going to be utterly boring for you guys to watch me spray multiple coats of the bronze hammered paint and then putting another 3 or 4 coats of the matte finish clear coat over top. So I'm going to double time this in editing so that it'll save you guys the hassle of having to watch me just repeat it over and over. Once you see it, the first coat, unless there's something that needs to be done in between coats, I'll stop and mention that. Otherwise, once you see the first coat of the hammered finish bronze, and then once you see the first coat of the matte finish clear coat, each one of the repeating coats will be the same. So that being said, I'll edit this and make it go a lot faster. Also, I mentioned earlier about wiping this down with mineral spirits. That's only if you're going to be painting it or in between coats or something like that. I don't suggest cleaning a finished piece with mineral spirits just because you don't want to mess up the finish with epoxy. And I would just maybe use like a soft cloth and some warm soapy water, or just try to buff it out with like a polishing rag or something. I wouldn't use anything harsh on a finished piece. But there you go, and then we'll be back in a little bit to do another coat after we see how this dries. All right, so after about 4 or 5 coats of the bronze and then about 3 coats of the matte finish clear coat, I've got the color that I like. I'm liking this. It feels good. It's not tacky, and I think we'll have a good turnout with this one. So what we're going to be doing now is I'm going to pick a side that I want to do my first pour on, because what I'm trying to do with this is normally people would just go ahead and block this in, pour it, let it run down. They pull it out, they would sand it all, and then they would do their stain this or paint it. But the epoxy would be dead even with it. It would just be a nice smooth finish, and I want to actually have the depth. I want to pour a little bit in, but I don't want it to be completely full. I want it to look more organic. And but to do that, I'm going to have to do each side individually, and I'll have to dam it up to make sure that it doesn't run out and get everywhere. And what I'm going to do is I have I have a piece of plastic here that I use for multiple projects, but it's got the sheathing tape on it that the epoxy won't stick to. And I've got a little piece of balsa wood here that coated with the same sheathing tape, so the epoxy won't stick to it. And I've got some 100% silicone. If you're not familiar with using this, you can get any craft store. 100% silicone is not water cleanup, so I'm going to have a damp rag with me so I can kind of clean my finger very often, and it can be a little bit messy. Also check when you first get, if you're unfamiliar with caulk gun and caulking, check and see if there's a little foil piece in here that has to be punctured before any will come out. Some have it, some don't, but it can be a big mess if you just squeezed the mess out of this and can't figure out why, and it pumps through the bottom and ruins the whole thing for you. So that's a tip. Keep a damp rag with you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fit these blocks on here so that I can dam up one side and get the epoxy poured. I think I'm going to do this side first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to silicone this piece of wood into place, and I'm going to get the edge of it to be at a 45-degree angle, roughly, on the corner there. And that way, when I do my pour, I'm going to make a mark on it with a pencil, and I can just I'll have this laying flat and level, and that way when I pour it, I can pour it up in my mark and not have to worry about it. I'm going to try to avoid doing any filing or sanding. So this is the first time doing it this way, so we'll see how this goes. I don't know if one way is really, it's all about look difference. As like I said, I want a more organic look. I want it to be, the level to be a little bit lower than the edge. I want to have more depth to it. Normally people will pour stuff and then they'll just sand it down, polish it up, and but it's just going to be flat, smooth on all sides. So we're going to give this a try. I don't think one's really faster or easier than the other, because the other way is going to be a lot of sanding and polishing. I'm trying to do this where I'm not going to have to polish the epoxy at all, and but at the same time I have to do each side individually and take these extra steps. So it's probably going to be a break even time wise, but it's just about going for the desired effect. You can wear gloves while messing with silicone. I mess with this stuff all the time, so I'm not going to, just because the gloves I have, it can kind of get a little messy and the glove will stick to whatever I'm touching, and I just won't have as much control over it, and I want to try to keep the mess off the product as much as possible. There'll be a little bit of it's going to squeeze out some areas, but I can always fix that up and clean that up later. After damming it up, this is what I've got. What I didn't realize was when I was filming this part and showing how to dam that up, that I had my big head right in front of the camera, so you guys couldn't see me actually putting it in place. And that made me realize that I needed a table stand camera to get a little bit up close while I'm actually working on something. So that being said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this scrap wood and those two clamps, and I'm going to make the OG 2000 version of the table camera stand. So I'll do a little video on that as well and show how I'm just going to piece that together out of some scrap wood, because like I said, I have a zero budget. But anyway, when I come back, I'll have that stand built, and I'll show you guys how we're going to dam up this side, and then we'll move into the epoxy pour. All right, so in the first part of the video, I stuck my big head in the way, and so I just edited out the part where I was actually siliconing this piece of balsa wood in and the bottom of this here. So what I want to do is, before I pour the epoxy on this side, I'll go ahead and show, because I can go ahead and put the block in place for this one. The groove is a little bit bigger than 1/4 of an inch, and so I've got me a piece of some scrap wood I have from some craft projects from before that fit in here nicely, so I can use it as a spreader, so I can put the silicone in there in a little bit more controlled manner and try not to make a mess. So something like that comes in handy, as opposed to trying to The first one I squirted it on this and it oozed all out, so I'm probably going to have some touch up to do. So what I will do on this one is I'll put the silicone, dab some in there, put the block in place, and then I can use this to clear out anything that oozes out, and I can also put some on the end of this to add to it if I want to make sure I've got good coverage. But let me find the little piece I had for sticking in there. Alright, so through the magic of editing, you guys didn't have to see me pause and go find this piece that I dropped on the floor. But anyway, this is another piece of 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch balsa wood that I had around that I covered in the sheathing tape. And so that way the epoxy won't stick to it. And I'm going to put that in there to block up this end. And it's going to be put in roughly trying to match the corner where it was carved out and line up the corner there. So I get almost like a 45-degree angle or so like that once I pour the epoxy. And that should dam up this end. And then of course I don't have to worry about this end because I don't have anything exiting on that side like I do on this one. And after I had silicone those in, I had found this piece and went ahead and smoothed this out, so that way I don't have to worry about going in and trying to carve out any silicone that oozes out. And so just doing little things to try to save myself some steps if I can. And it's still all a learning process, so we'll see if there's any hiccups later. But to control it, I'm going to go ahead and squirt some silicone out here instead of trying to get that tip in there and making a mess. And I'm going to dab this and see if I can get a little bit more control this way. And with the extra layers of clear coat that I put on there, I'm hoping that this will help release the silicone when it comes time to pull the balsa wood out. I know it won't, I mean, it'll be easy enough to pull out, but I'm hoping that I won't have to do too much touching up on the finish. I'm hoping maybe a little bit of polishing on it, and that might be enough, but we'll see. All right, so we got that in there, and now get that in there as best I can. I'm going to take this to smooth what oozed out back toward the gap line and pull it up a little bit. I'm going to try to get a little bit on the sides here to make sure I get that side sealed up. And if a little bit does, like just barely, the lip of that got covered in silicone, I'm not going to touch it right now. I'm going to leave it be. Once it's dried, it will be a lot easier to kind of try to, take my thumb and rub that off and get that off, as opposed to me trying to clean it right now and it's smearing all over the place. So I'll fight that battle later. But that piece is in there, and we'll set this aside and let it dry. And then once it's dry, I'll come back and we'll start working on getting the color pour done for this. All right, so the silicone has dried, and that one is the one I showed you a minute ago. It's dried, so we're ready to do a pour on this. I've already done my measurements. I'm using a new brand of epoxy. This one is not a deep pour. This one you can only do in 1/8 inch increments. So again, be sure to check your brand and check the stats on it to find out, if it's deep pour, if it's a tabletop type, and you want to see if they're UV protectant or not. This one is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour enough in here that I can kind of get an idea of the color and hopefully see what I want, because it's actually 1/8 of an inch up to that line there. So I'm going to fill it up to before it starts running into these troughs and test the color out and see if I like it. I purchased a sampler box of pigments, and one of them I wanted was red. I was hoping it was going to have a strong red in there, and they labeled this one crimson, and I'm going to have to channel my inner Sheldon, because in what universe is this crimson? That looks like it's on the verge of hot pink in my opinion, but I have some red food coloring that I could adjust that. But I'll mix some of this up first before I pass judgment. It may be that once it's mixed with the resin, maybe it'll be a little darker looking. I don't know. But if not, I've got a way to remedy that. So I'm going to try some red, some orange, because I want to try to get somewhere in the realm of like a fiery lava kind of look if I can, or at least in that color range somewhere in there. And with this brand of epoxy, you have 1 part. Well, if you do it by volume on this one, I had to read it with a fine-tooth comb, but if you do it by volume, it's 1-to-1. But I measure mine out, and it said if you measure it, or if you weigh it out, then it would be 1 part resin to 0.83 parts hardener. So I weighed that out, and I've got my measurements here. I've already weighed those. And with this one, you mix both of them into one, because you are going to have some residual on the inside of the wall of each cup. So especially when you're dealing with small amounts, if I was to just say, okay, well, I'll mix one into the other, it's going to be off because all of one's going to be in 1 cup. But everything except for what's in the residual areas of the wall will be poured into there and it'll throw the measurement off. So if you pour both of them into one container, then you're at least getting a similar amount of residuals left behind so that you get a more even mixture in your cup. And then we're going to stir that for about 6 minutes. And this is a much thicker product than what I was using. That deep pour was a very slow drying brand. You could pour it with 3 inches on that, and because it was so runny, the bubbles would kind of gas out themselves, and so it would degas and clear the bubbles as opposed to just them staying suspended in the thicker resin. This one I'll have to check after I pour it. I'll come back in a little while and see if I need to put a heat gun to it to pop some of the bubbles. But you want to scrape the sides really well. Try to get as much in there as possible, especially if you're on a limited budget. You want to stretch it out as much as you can, especially if you're, I'm gaining knowledge on it, but there's still some mistakes that could be made that could cost me money if I'm not careful. So I want to say as much as I can in case I do have a mistake. If you get a bad leak on a project, especially that runnier stuff, then you might be pouring a good chunk of money away. All right, now once I pour this hardener in there, since this is a thicker one, and it's the curing rate on this one is also faster, so I don't have as much work time as I did. The other one I could leave it in the cup for probably up to about an hour before I had to pour it if I wanted to. This one, I'm going to have to start working with it fairly soon because it will start to thicken up real quick. Also, I've got my window open with the fan going. This one is advertised, low VOC, and all that good stuff, but still, you want to have ventilation, 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 always. And like I said, if you're in doubt, wear a mask. Like I said, if I do any pours while I'm not filming, even the ventilation, I'll be wearing a mask just in case. And when I go to stir this, I'm going to stand by the fan just so that it's pulling a lot of the fumes out. Alright, let's check the timer on here. Alright. I don't know if you can see that pretty, but that's pretty thick stuff. It's going to get a little cloudy at first, and it's going to bubble up some. Some of those bubbles will come out on their own, but after I pour it, I will have to come back and check and see if I need to use the heat gun to get rid of any bubbles. But I'm going to stand over by the window and do this, so I'm going to stop it right here, and I'll come back after it's time. Alright, so I just found out this stuff has a very quick reaction time. I did not get back in less than 6 minutes, and this stuff started to harden up already, and it's really hot. It's a chemical reaction. So I mixed up a new batch with the same weights and mixed it for 6 minutes, and then let it sit for just a couple minutes, and I went ahead and poured it separate here because I want to mix the different pigments here. And I'm talking a little bit fast because I'm worried about how fast this reaction time is. This is a new product I'm not used to, and I was a little surprised at how fast it started to set up. I'm going to start with about this much pigment. Actually, go even on there. I just have to try to make sure I get the same amount next time. As little in the other bag as possible. I don't want to contaminate pigments. I'm going to go about that much. Set this off to the side. I'll clean that later because, like I said, I'm worried about how fast this stuff is going to start setting up. Alright, I'm going to do a little bit of pouring, mixing here. This stuff is thick, it's going to make a big mess. wipe off the edge as best I can. I don't want to drip it onto the piece. I'm going to switch the camera to the blue crane here. Alright, so now I'm going to try to pour some of this in here without dripping it, and I'm only going to pour it to the edge before you get into the channels there. I think I want more orange, so I'm going to pour just straight orange in here. Alright, that's pretty much right at the edge there. I'm going to get one of the stirring sticks and try to stir that up a little bit to see if I can get a nice pattern. Just going to take this, instigate a little bit of something. Not much room to work with. Alright, I'm going to set this off to the side for a second because since I have some left over, I'm going to use it for some experimenting. Alright, so I've got the heat gun. You can see there's a bubble right there. But I don't want to overheat this and scorch. You can see there just a little bit like that. And a lot of those bubbles came out. See if I can show you on here. And so I'll do that for this, and then I'll be back in about 10 minutes or so just to check on it. After about 10 minutes I'll check on it again and see if I need to blast it with the heat. And we'll go from there. I'll also might swirl it up a little bit to try to get more of a pattern as it dries. Hey everybody, thanks for checking out my videos, and despite having the looks and charm of Ryan Reynolds, I still need your help. If you could hit the like and subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate it. You can also find my work on Etsy. Just look up the Ox Gallery. Link will be right here, and actually it won't be because I haven't figured all that out yet, but in the future
I'll figure all that out and get like a link here. But you can go to Etsy and look up the theoxgallery, and eventually I'll have it all figured out. But the subscribe button should be right here, and hopefully it's not right on the face, which it probably is. But please subscribe, please like, and please be patient, and I'll have better videos coming soon as I figure all this out. Thank you much.